Spider-Man No Way Home was the early Christmas present web-slinging in to single-handedly save not only the box office returns of Disney, but also keep the doors open and the lights on in cinemas across the world. The latest installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has already grossed over $1.5 billion, which has made it the most profitable movie of the entire pandemic. It is, however, impossible to talk about, let alone review, the new Spider-Man movie without diving headfirst into some pretty meaty spoilers, which start about 20 minutes into the film and never really let up. So, if the video title didn't give it away, and my warning hasn't reached you yet, this will be a spoiler review, with lots of spoilers, talking about all the spoilers I want to talk about with you. I apologise in advance for rambling because, spoiler alert, kinda really enjoyed this movie. Spoilers. You've been warned. So, the leaks coming out on the internet in the ramp-up to the release of this film made its intended surprises some of the worst kept secrets in Hollywood. There were photo leaks, inside scoops, and actors flat out coming out and saying that they're in the film. Looking at you, Alfred Molina, you great, glorious thespian. But to be honest, even if you saw it coming, the wonderful twists and turns of Spider-Man No Way Home made it the best film I saw with an audience in the last 2 years. Probably since Avengers Endgame, with epic reveals upon epic reveals. Spider-Man No Way Home picks up straight after the end of Spider-Man Far From Home, pretty much completing the Home trilogy. Mysterio has revealed Spider-Man's identity to the entire world, and Peter Parker and his friends and family are feeling the consequences of that. Even though it was heavily rumoured in the lead up to the film, it was fantastic to see Charlie Cox back in the role of Matt Murdock here. This means we now officially have Daredevil, my second favourite comic book character of all time, back in the MCU, following Netflix's cancellation of his fantastic show. This means that this character is now free to return, and has been officially confirmed to be suiting up in the classic red horns very soon. The scene, where everyone is sitting around a dining table, is so good. A brick comes soaring through the window, and Matt Murdock, the blind lawyer, catches it. Peter asks, "How'd you do that?" "I'm a very good lawyer." Chef's kiss. Throughout all of this, Peter is feeling the weight of the burden he's put on his friends. None of them can get into college, so he goes to visit Doctor Strange to mind wipe the entire world. In the usual comic book logic, this backfires, tears open the multiverse, and then the film kicks into overdrive. In what has to be one of the wildest contract negotiations of all time, the suits at Disney and Marvel managed to convince Alfred Molina to return as Doc Ock, Jamie Foxx to return as Electro, Thomas Hayden Church as Sandman, Rhys Evans as Lizard, and lastly, the insane Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. All of this was revealed in the advertising, and in a stroke of genius through the multiverse developments of the MCU, make the oldest Spider-Man live-action films canon. So, with those key actors coming back, it was a foregone conclusion that we would be getting more actors returning. But instead of spilling all of that, and spoiling that, Marvel let the hype train roll on, essentially going media silent. My entire cinema exploded when Andrew Garfield arrived in the film and pulled off his mask. Absolutely erupted. I have always liked Garfield in the role of Spider-Man, even if I didn't quite think his movies were really that strong. But I admit it hit me square in the feels the moment he arrived. And then Tobey Maguire arrived, looking like the coolest school counselor we never knew we needed. Even though I knew they were coming, it didn't lessen the impact of this moment. They weren't just there for a cameo either. Their presence in the film was baked into the plot itself, which is why it is impossible to discuss this film without diving into these major spoilers. The entire plot of the movie hinges around Spider-Man needing to send all the villains back to their own realities before the multiverse tears itself apart. But the problem is that he works out that in their worlds, they die while fighting their own versions of Spider-Man. In the most Peter Parker thing of all time, he sets out to cure them and thus help and rehabilitate them. I found this pretty funny, to be honest. Imagine if all the heroes took that approach in their own movies. Instead of a superhero beatdown, we get a therapy session where all the villains can self-actualize and recognize how their actions are impacting others. Whatever, it's a superhero movie. There's plenty of action anyways. I really liked the action set piece between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. It was a huge amount of fun and resembled the clever cinematography of the Mysterio fights from the previous film. When Strange wants to send the villains home to their fates, Spider-Man instead decides to try and save them, and thus we get a bonkers set piece in the mirror dimension. When Peter Parker figures out how to beat Strange with math and geometry, I laughed. Something I think we all often forget is that Peter Parker is actually insanely clever. So watching him beat the master of the mystics at his own magic was very entertaining, as well as being one of the more visually dynamic scenes the series has ever attempted. And thus the redemption of the villains begins. Peter manages to help Doc Ock, and then we get the in control version of that character from the film that we all know, love, and remember. The sympathetic villain. I love Doc Ock. His fight with Spider-Man on the bridge in this film is probably one of the more visually dynamic scenes from the film. Doc Ock stealing Peter's nanotech, and then Peter using that nanotech to sync with Doc Ock's tentacles was very amusing and extremely entertaining. He just Bluetooth syncs the technology and puppets him around. It was a clever reversal that also managed to be really funny. The first shocking reveal of the movie was extremely effective. Goblin, who was buried under Norman Osborn's shockingly befuddled and, dare I say it, kind persona, breaks loose and we get one of the most vicious and brutal beatdowns that Tom Holland's Spider-Man has ever dealt with. See, while some of the villains were happy to be cured, some of them, namely Electro and Goblin, didn't want to be cured. Here, they really showed why Goblin is Spider-Man's ultimate villain. Spider-Man loses. He gets the living hell beat out of him, and when Aunt May tried to help, Goblin kills her. I loved and hated every second of this scene. It was horrific and sad, and the way they twisted your emotions was incredible. After being hit by Goblin's glider and blown up by one of his bombs, May just appears to shake it off. She just jumps up, takes a beat, walks it off, and I was like, damn lady, you're tough as nails. And then she delivers the line that every Spider-Man fan knows, the line that signifies the Spider-Man origin, the line that becomes the very foundation of his character. With great power comes great responsibility. And it was right there. I knew what was going to happen, because that made this Aunt May, this Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. And watching that unfold was pure trauma. May can't catch her breath, and Peter finds her bleeding way too much blood, and then she dies. And it's heartbreaking. This entire time, we assumed that the MCU was skipping Spider-Man's origin story. It was a case of, here he is. You know the story. You've already seen it. Let's go. But no, we all assumed. And there was very few signs in the film that there was ever an Uncle Ben. We were so used to the origin story at that point, we just assumed. When in fact, we never skipped the origin story. We just watched a 3-film origin story. And let me tell you, watching the death of Aunt May hurt in a way I never felt in the other Spider-Man films. So kudos to Marvel. You really twisted that knife. Bravo. I think that this is why the other Spider-Man's entrance works as well as it does. When the audience is at their lowest, when MCU Peter Parker is in his darkest moment, they bring in the legacy Spider-Man, Maguire and Garfield, for guidance and support. And their scenes of those Spider-Man just talking is pure fan service. The villains get some of this as well, and these conversations are pretty much every dream conversation that any Spider-Man fan has ever had. If anything, they probably went on a moment too long, but I think that this movie needed those moments of levity. It's a pretty dark film. The scenes of Spider-Man all working together to trap and cure the villains was a visually bonkers action set piece. Everyone had something to do. From MJ to Ned. Oh yeah, Ned has magic now. Makes more sense the less you think about it. Everyone brought their A game here. Honestly, not a single person phoned it in. When I heard about what this movie was attempting, I was like, yep, Too many characters. We've been here before. Spider-Man 3, Amazing Spider-Man 2, both franchise killers. I was preparing for the worst. How could this movie not be hot garbage? But unlike those movies, this one never reeked of studio interference or franchise launchpads. There was so much I liked about this movie. The central relationship between Peter Parker and MJ was amazing. Love Zendaya in this film. Between Far From Home and No Way Home, they really developed her character, and I hope she sticks around for future roles. Oh man, while it was great to have Maguire back for his role, it was incredible seeing Garfield back in the red and blue spandex. I don't know what the behind the scenes stuff was like, but kudos to him. He put up with questions around this film for like a year and never once confirmed he was coming back. He pretty much flat out lied in interviews, and that went a long way to protecting the surprises and the specialness of the film. And look, honestly, of everyone in the film, he looked like he was the happiest to be back. There was a scene in the film where MJ fell from some scaffolding, and the scene straight up mirrors the scene where Gwen fell to her death in Amazing Spider-Man 2. When Holland's Spider-Man can't get there in time, Garfield swings in and saves her, and my entire cinema lost it. The look on his face when he asks her if she's okay, and then she asks him if he's okay, and you can just see the entire weight of the world on his shoulders. The weight of him being unable to save his Gwen. God, it was perfect. If anything, this movie gave Garfield Spider-Man the ability to process the trauma that the lack of a third movie in his own franchise deprived him of. I think Garfield's appearance in this movie is enough to justify giving him another crack at the Spider-Man cowl again. He was perfect. Another scene I really quite liked a bit was the final fight between Holland's Spider-Man and Goblin, where he's no longer pulling his punches. With each punch, Dafoe's grin just gets bigger and more manic, and you know that this is all he craved. Chaos and discord. When the other Spider-Man jump in to stop him from crossing the line, that entire scene was just played to perfection. Holland's really come into his own here, especially between his first appearance and then in this movie. Watching his character grow and develop has, I think, cemented his take on Spider-Man. It was kind of awesome seeing the 3 generations of Spider-Man together. I know it's been done in the animated Into the Spider-Verse, but here it just hits differently. This movie was a love letter from fans to fans, across different actors, generations, and films. It acted as a wonderful redemption for the previous films, as well as a fitting launchpad for the future of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Because, I suppose, that's what this film is. The conclusion of his origin story. This MCU Spider-Man has always existed in the shadow of Tony Stark's Iron Man. I think that's why the previous Spider-Man movies haven't quite felt like Spider-Man movies. They were just pieces of the MCU narrative. But it's here, in No Way Home, that the series course corrects. We get the first true Spider-Man film of the MCU, and the end of the film plants us firmly into the Spider-Man lore we all know and love. At the end of the film, in order to fix the multiverse rift, Peter asks Doctor Strange to cast the spell again to make the world forget about him being Spider-Man, and thus the world is fixed. But at great cost. Everyone forgets him. It was a super bittersweet, melancholic way to end the film. When Peter goes to visit MJ and finds her battered and bruised, but safe away from the knowledge of who he is, he decides not to risk her life any further. That hits right in the feels. The film essentially ends with Peter, as Spider-Man, in the classic blue and red suit that looked like it was torn straight out of the comics. Free of the tech, free of the advanced AI, just Peter Parker, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And it's here that the film closes and completes the origin story of the MCU Spider-Man. So, where do we go from here? I personally would love to see Black Cat enter the MCU. Kraven the Hunter? Kingpin? I'd even love to see a newer, underutilized villain, like Mr. Negative. Bring in Hobgoblin. I think even bringing in Venom would be a great new development for Holland's Spider-Man. I'm still riding pretty high on how crowd-pleasing this film was. I do wonder how well it will play a little further down the line, once the thrill of seeing the reunion of the Spider-Man together wears off, but at the moment, I really do enjoy this film. It's probably a little too long. There was at least 15 minutes that could have been shaved out of this, but then you'd miss some of the pure fan service that made this film so much fun to watch, which pays homage to the previous 2 decades of Spider-Man on the big screen. Spider-Man: No Way Home is a pure celebration of everything that's come before, as well as an excellent board clear for everything still to come. I give Spider-Man: No Way Home an A-. I hope the audience you saw this movie with was as enthusiastic as mine, because this was the best movie I've seen with an audience since Avengers Endgame. As always, I'm interested in what you thought of the movie. Like and subscribe, drop me a comment below, and stay tuned for more reviews coming soon. Later days.